Okay, we'd like to get started here.
Okay. All right.
Hopefully you're in the right class. Should we adopt and will I love them? My name's Lee Boger. My wife and I, it's my wife Kathy. We're elders and elders' wives in the Indianapolis church there in Indiana. But we love Colorado, love visiting down there. This is awesome. Well, we're hoping that this class will help lead you to determine how you can experience what God says in James 1:27. Religion that God our Father accepts as pure and faultless as this, to look after orphans and widows in their distress. You know, there are orphans and they are in distress. So we're hoping this class will help you navigate that terrain. And what we'd like to do is start off with a prayer. Let's pray together. Father, your heart for the fatherless, your heart for the orphans just jumps out of the scriptures, Old Testament and New Testament. And as your servant James writes, that you view this endeavor, this willingness and sacrifice as pure and faultless. Father, that's simply an extension of your heart. And you have been that way for those who cannot speak for themselves, who have needs, and your desire to put them in a family. Please give us the wisdom, guide us with your Spirit today, and I pray it would meet many, many needs. It's in your Son's name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Well, let me introduce you to our family. This is a picture from last Christmas. And I won't tell you about how the 9-foot tree fell and that whole story. I'll spare you that. Our oldest daughter on the left is Natalie. She graduated from Purdue with an engineering degree, but she wants to go back next fall to pursue a nursing degree. And Mariah, the youngest, on the right there, she's in her last year at Purdue. And our son David was the one we adopted when he was 4 years old from Romania in 1999. He's now 22. And all our kids, David's best friends are in church. Mariah and Natalie love the ministry there at Purdue and fully engaged. All our kids have been multiple Hope Youth Corps trips, and so it's been a family affair. In fact, we're going this Christmas to the Philippines. And as a family, we've never done that before, so it's going to be a real fun trip. Now, the first time we saw David was in a picture that we got from the adoption agency, and this was what's called as a referral. You know, would you like to? This is a child that's been chosen for you. What do you think? So this was our first pick of him. So that was a really cool thing. Okay, I'll pass it over to my wife. Oh, yeah. One of the things that my wife has decided to do was start up a side business where she is a adoption coach. So she has her own website, and because of her experience, her professional experience in this area, she's going to be doing most of the sharing today. I'll come up a few times, but so you're going to glean from her wisdom.
Well, it is my passion. It's definitely my passion, and I really am so glad you're here and encouraged that you're here, and you're open to following what God is going to put on your hearts about adoption. You know, that's exactly it. I can't decide for you. It's not for everyone. As much as I love adoption, it's not for everyone. But what I'd like to do today is what I do for my clients, and that is to provide you with the tools and the process to answering the challenging questions. You know, it's like I said, it's not an easy decision. It's like counting the costs. You know, becoming a disciple, it's the same kind of thing. You want to sit down and count the costs before you make this big commitment. There are pros and cons, but I really am confident that God will lead you, just like He did us, to the decision that's right for your family. So here's some crucial topics. First of all, consider the reason. And I've got a lot of questions. They're actually on a handout you can pick up later, so you don't need to write down these questions, but literally a whole page of questions you can discuss with your spouse and with God to help you kind of navigate that. So why are you considering adoption? How about maybe because you and your family are infertile? That could definitely be a reason. If you can't have children, I would like to encourage you to allow time to grieve that. Even adopting, yes, you will have a child, you get to experience being a parent, but it is not the same as birthing a child and for moms, carrying that child within you. Not, you don't have the child that has your same DNA, so definitely I believe that if you go through that grieving process, you'll be more fully open to what God has in store for you with the idea of adoption. Perhaps you have biological children, but want to give an orphan a home. Really, no matter how you answer this question, you will be blessed. I mean, why wouldn't God bless you? Like the scripture Lee said, he has a heart for the orphans, and he definitely will bless you. Here's a quote that I fully believe in. Many adoptive families find that once they bring their child into their home, their lives are irrevocably changed for the better. Now, Lee is going to share about one of the adoptions in the Bible.
If you have a Bible and you want to turn to Exodus chapter 2, you can follow along. I'm going to be reading from Exodus 2, verses 1 to 10 from the New Living Translation. Start in verse 1. About this time, a man and woman from the tribe of Levi got married. The woman became pregnant, gave birth to a son. She saw that he was a special baby and kept him hidden for 3 months. And when she could no longer hide him, she got a basket made of papyrus reeds and waterproofed it with tar and pitch. She put the baby in the basket and laid it among the reeds along the bank of the Nile River. The baby's sister then stood at a distance watching to see what would happen to him. Soon Pharaoh's daughter came down to bathe in the river, and her attendants walked along the riverbank. When the princess saw the basket among the reeds, she sent her maid to get it for her. When the princess opened it, she saw the baby. The little boy was crying, and she felt sorry for him. "This must be one of the Hebrew children," she said. Then the baby's sister approached the princess. "Should I go and find one of the Hebrew women to nurse the baby for you?" she asked. "Yes, do," the princess replied. So the girl went and called the baby's mother. "Take this baby and nurse him for me." The princess told the baby's mother, "I will pay you for your help." So the woman took her baby home and nursed him. Later, when the boy was older, his mother brought him back to Pharaoh's daughter, who adopted him as her own son. The princess named him Moses, for she explained, "I lifted him out of the water." Pharaoh's daughter ended up adopting Moses. And Moses' mom, Jochebed, must have struggled, since her only way to allow her son to live was to let somebody else raise him. Many birth moms, when they go through this decision, it's incredibly hard for them. They decide, I can't give him or her what they need. Pharaoh's daughter even struggled with her own fears. Put yourself in her place. Her dad said, all these Hebrew babies need to die. Now she's deciding, okay, do I go against what my father said? That could be big trouble for me. I might even die. And she's willing to work through those fears. And what helped her work through the fear was simply her compassion for the child. And it said that earlier in the when she first saw the baby, the boy was crying and she felt sorry for him. That came from God putting that in her heart, the compassion that she had. Pharaoh's daughter was patient as the years went by. Moses' mom probably nursed him for maybe 2 to 4 years in that culture. It would take that long if they decide that the child is weaned. She had a heart for a child that she didn't even give birth to. And maybe that's in your heart. You have that kind of compassion. My wife has had that for as long as I've known her. She was willing to wait for him, and then she chose the name. And so she was fully involved in that whole process, was Pharaoh's daughter. So do you have compassion in your heart for a child who right now doesn't have a family?
I think it's important to decide your reason, think about your reason, because your compassion will help you in the future should you decide to adopt. It's just remembering that. There's going to be hard times. I'm going to be sharing some things about our son, and he's given me permission to share these things. There'll be times when hurtful things may be said to you, and that's the time for me when I've gone back to my passion and my compassion, and it's really encouraged me in those times. So after you consider the reason, it's time to consider the costs. How would adopting change your life? And if you're here, you probably already started to think about those things. If you're married, how would it change your marriage? One exciting thing is that adoption can be for single parents too. These children don't have any parents, so they'll be very blessed to have one. And it's really encouraging that that's an option for single people. If you already have children, how would it affect the children that you have in your home? If you don't have children, I'm sure in the church you've watched families that have children. You've seen the joys and the sacrifices, the ups and the downs. You've seen the sacrifice in time and money and emotions and blood, sweat, and tears. But really, speaking from a parent of 3, there's no greater joy than being a parent. It's just amazing and humbling to be used by God to mold the soul of a human being. And there's nothing like at the end of a day, a long, hard day, coming in the door and having this pint-sized little boy or girl come running to you and saying, "Mommy, Daddy," and giving you a big hug. I just can't describe it to you. And really, being a parent has helped me understand the relationship with God and his son Jesus to a completely different level. Another question: are you willing to accept the unique challenges that many adoptees face, such as the empty feeling of not knowing where he belongs, or wondering why she was abandoned? These are deep waters. Are you willing to patiently work through any bonding difficulties your adopted child may have, as well as any developmental delays in some cases, and perhaps snafus in the process? You probably heard that there's a mound of paperwork in adoption, and there is. And when I first heard it, I thought, well, stack of papers this big, how hard can it be? I can fill out papers. Well, it's not just filling out the papers, it's going to the agencies that you need to get the copies of the birth certificates and marriage licenses and getting the background check and everything, and then being on the phone for hours waiting because they didn't send it, and it's just a lot. Yeah. But one person likened that to the morning sickness that a birth mom feels. And I get that. So the birth mom's feeling like throwing up, and they're going, "Oh, I feel horrible, but there's a baby coming." And when you're adopting, it's like, "Oh, this paperwork, but there's a baby." So it really does help to kind of look at it that way. But that will be something to consider. There's a lot. And there are snafus as far as delays. We were told that we were getting ready to go to Romania next week, yay, and then they said it'll be another 2 months. And I've known families who the adoption has fallen through. And one family we know, their child died before they got to adopt their child. I mean, there's a lot of things that could go wrong. Are you prepared for that? And having your support will really help. It's going to take a boatload of patience and perseverance. And Lee's going to share a little bit about that and how we experience that in our own family.
Well, when you bring an orphan into your home, they're no longer an orphan, right, physically.
Right.
They've got a family. And what we've learned, not just in our own experience, but working with and talking with 15 to 20 adoptive families, a lot of these kids are still an orphan emotionally, even when they're in your home, because the emotional damage that they've gone through, it's hard to relate to. I'll give you an example. We adopted our son when he was 4. He was with his birth mom and dad until he was 18 months. Romania has socialized medicine, so that gives them the right, the parents, if you can't take care of your child, you can take him to the hospital and say, "We can't do this anymore." And that's what happened to him. So what impact does it have on a toddler? One day, he never sees his mom and dad again. What would that do to the kid? What would that do inside of him to trust again? And then he's in an orphanage for 2.5 years. 30 kids per worker. They only got time to change a diaper and feed him, and that's about it. He cries, nobody's there to comfort. He's got stuff, he just needs a hug, nobody's there. These impacts that they have on the children emotionally, it's going to impact you as a parent. When you have biological children, there's a natural bond, and I'll tell you what we thought when we brought him into our family. We had 2 girls at the time, and we thought, well, we'll just plug him in, and we'll be able to impact and train him just like the girls. It wasn't that way, because when you don't have that natural trust and bond, training is harder. Training is more challenging. At least that's what we've seen. So from their perspective, and not every child's like this, you know, there's children we've known in families, they adopt them at birth, and the emotional challenges aren't as big, it seems. So one thing to consider is, how are you as a parent or as a person, how are you just emotionally in your life? Are you fairly stable, or do you have a lot of emotional challenges? And if you do, then our recommendation is you should adopt younger, maybe under 2 years old if you can. That just helps the transition and trying to connect with your child. The older the child is at adoption, the more these challenges will be there emotionally. I think that's it.
One thing I wish I could have changed in the process of adoption is I wish that they had told me in the home study that adopting an older child, especially from one of these Eastern European countries, was going to be like adopting a special needs child. I wish they had told me that. Now, we wouldn't have changed a thing. We would have gone through with David, but it would have helped to know that. Just going in and going, okay, you know, now we know. So that's why we want to let you know. We don't want it to be discouraging, but we just want you to know the realities, especially like Lee said, the older the child, the more chances are in our experience that you're going to have those issues. That leads me to whether or not you have the support that you need. Not everyone's going to be as excited as you are about adopting. Fortunately, we had all of our family on board, but we did talk to a family, friends of the family that we, you know, before we adopted, and said, hey, we're really excited, we're adopting a child from Romania, and they looked at us and said, why would you want to do that? That's right. And it was just like, well, I guess we're not coming to you for support. You know, I didn't say that, but, you know, you really do need that. And if you don't have that, rally the people up around you or find people that have adopted. This is a great place. I mean, there are people in these adoption classes that they might be living across the country, but you can exchange phone numbers with them and really get that support. That's really what you'll need. And I have not talked to an adoptive parent who doesn't love to talk about their adoption.
That's right.
So they'll talk with you. Are you willing to sacrifice the money it would cost? Certainly you've heard about the money. I did a little research because things have changed in the 19 years since we adopted, but right now I understand international adoptions can cost up to $42,000. And you know, back when we adopted, it was the equivalence of about buying a new minivan. So people, you know, look at us like we're crazy that we're spending that money, but I'm like, isn't a child a lot more valuable than a minivan? And how many people go and buy a minivan, you know? And so this is, it's just perspective. Domestic U.S. newborn up to $37,000. To foster, to adopt, about $3,000 or less. Now there is an adoption tax credit, and Shelley can kind of correct me if I'm wrong, that I understand is over $13,000. Is that about right? Which is wonderful. When we adopted, it was $5,000. We'll take whatever we can get, but that means that after the year that you finish the adoption process, the following year when you file your taxes, you get that back, which is wonderful. You know, there are many ways to raise money. we had a family in our church who had a garage sale. And you're thinking garage sale, $200 to $300. Well, what they did was they rallied up all their friends in the church and asked for donations. Big ticket items, not clothing, but like furniture, big electronics, and they made thousands of dollars in their garage sale. Another family decided when they sent out their annual Christmas letter that they would say that, you know, we don't want Christmas gifts this year, but in place of that, if you feel moved to give financial donations to our adoption. And wouldn't you know, they got more Christmas gifts that year than ever for that purpose. And for us, we had been saving up some money, but what we did for the adoption, for the tax credit part of it, we went to my parents who did have the money available to loan us that part of it. And then less than a year later, when we got it back, we just handed it back to them. So at least that took care of that part if you know somebody in the position that can help you in that way. You know, my experience is that if people have the heart to adopt, God will take care of the money. That's not a big thing for God. So we've considered the reason, we've considered the costs. Now let's consider the fears. There may be some of those out there. You know, very often one person is 100% I'm ready, and the other spouse is hesitant. That's the way we were. Yeah. So I grew up in a family where my brother, I have one adopted brother and one biological brother. So I grew up with this. It was natural to me. It was a no-brainer. We didn't treat either brother any differently at all. In fact, now we often forget, and we'll be talking about hereditary things like cancer in our family, and we're like, oh yeah, Tom, that doesn't apply to you. You know, we just forget. And a lot of people would think that I looked more like my adopted brother, and I really do, than my biological brother. And so I knew that. I knew I would love an adopted child as a birth child just because I saw it. And so after we had Natalie, 3 years into our marriage, we had 2 miscarriages, a distance apart. And that got me thinking more about adopting for myself. And like Lee said, I always had a passion, but this got stronger. And I would watch those TV shows, you know, the documentaries of the horrible situations in Russia and Romania where the kids were lined up in cribs and no one was taking care of them, and just horrible things. And I would cry through those. And I'm like, Lord, can't we help one, just one of those children and save one of them? But Lee wasn't right there on the same page, and we had some discussions like, would we have a boy or girl, or would we go international? But nothing really came of that. And then we were blessed by the birth of Mariah. Still, in my heart, I had this opposite pull, 2 different directions. I've got to adopt a child. I was feeling like I've got to adopt a child or I'm going to die. And then Lee was like, no, I'm not ready for that. And so I'm like, oh, I can't live this way. And, you know, what's funny is Lee is more generous than I am. So I'm like, why is this? He's more generous of the 2 of us. Why isn't this working, you know? And so anytime there was a sermon about adoption or anything, I would just give him the big elbow, like, are you listening? You know, or articles, I'd hand him these articles, oh, read this book. And you know what? He just wasn't there. And so it was a very soul-searching time in my life. I really went to God like Hannah in the Bible did and just prayed, God, do one thing or the other. Either take away this strong passion or have Lee come alongside with me, because I need him to have the passion. We're in this together, and I need him to have the passion. And you know, up until that point, I was praying about it a little bit here and there, maybe once a week praying about it, and I thought to myself, you know what? I better be praying every day about this. So I committed to that. I committed to those 2 things. One, I was going to trust God, and I decided I was not going to say one more word to Lee. It was hard. And I prayed every day. And fast forward, and Lee's going to tell the rest of the story. After 3 years. Praying for 3 years.
Well, after my cracked ribs healed, I decided just to find. I told her at one point, I said, because she was pushing it a little too much, I said, honey, that's enough. Okay, I'm not there. And so that's when she started praying, and she didn't bring it up again. So at one point, you know, I could tell how strong it was in her. And I thought, you know, there's got to be a way that I can sort through why am I hesitant? Because 2 daughters, perfect family, I'm good. You know, I don't need to have 3. That was kind of part of my hesitation. So then I decided, well, let me just read through the whole, let me just read every scripture I can find on how God feels toward the orphans and the fatherless.
ahead of it.
Well, yeah, and you can imagine where that led. That changed my heart. If God's this way and my wife feels that strongly, then I've got to be on board. And that would be my recommendation. If you're not on the same page, don't go forward.
Right. Yes.
One spouse cannot say, well, this is your thing, so why don't you just go do it? And I'll be there to support you. You got to be all in. The challenges that are going to come require you to be all in. Otherwise, you can build resentments. You know, you're the one who wanted to bring this child here. You don't want that. So work through it, pray, and take the time you needed, because it took a while for God to work on my heart. And I'm glad, so glad He did. The things I've learned, the things He's brought into our life, I never would have learned.
Right.
I never would have seen the stuff I've seen in my character without this journey. So it's been great.
And if you're the one who's gung-ho, I would just encourage you to be patient. It's hard. And two, to remember, it's really God's timing. That's what helped me. It was March of 1995 that we had our second miscarriage. I don't remember the date exactly. But wouldn't you know that later when we adopted David, he was born in March of 1995. So when I was grieving our second miscarriage, halfway around the world, this child was being born. And what's amazing is if that child that I carried had lived, we would have never met David. And it's just really mind-boggling. And another thing that's kind of fun for our family is that our daughter, Natalie, was born on April 11th. And a different year, Mariah was born on December 11th. And what was David's birthday? March 11th. And so when I heard that, it's just kind of a little funny thing, but I'm like, you know what? He's a Boger. He is going to be in our family. I just knew that. It's kind of neat how God did that. So I wanted to kind of open up and see what maybe some of your fears are. So it's kind of audience participation. Does anybody have any other fears or different kinds of fears that they have that they want to share, if you'd like? Anything? The brother mentioned, for the sake of the recording, that just the fear of not being able to love the child the same as your birth children, and getting his heart around that. And we'll talk about that in a minute. Anything else? Well, there's a lot of different ones. I'm sure you'll go through those. And we'll just move right on to that, what he mentioned, just being, will I be able to love this child as I would my own? And that's kind of funny the way that's worded. My own, because this child will be your own. But thinking of it as, will I be able to love the child like a birth child? You know, in my family growing up with my brother David, in our family with my brother Tom, and with our in our family with David, our son, and with every single family that I know, the answer is yes, you will. You will be able to love the child like a birth child. That's not to say there won't be difficult times bonding and struggling with things. It's definitely a legitimate concern, because we, especially as disciples, we want to give our whole heart. We do. And we definitely don't want to turn back. We don't want to have, failed adoptions. I know that no one wants that. So it is something definitely to wait on God for Him to get our hearts there. But I definitely know and am confident that God will put the love in your heart for the child that He gives you. It's Him giving you the child, and He will put that in your heart, is what I've seen. So here's some other questions as well. Will my child prefer his biological parents later in life? That's a fear. Will my child ever bond completely with me? Or will he have times that he feels I'm not his real parent? That happened with David. Usually it wasn't until David was in trouble or something that he would say, well, I'd rather live with my birth parents, or da-da-da-da. So I knew kind of where that was coming, although I was tempted to feel triggered at the moment. But, when he said that, I kind of took a cue from Jennifer Radel. I'd heard her speak years ago, and she said to her child, he'd pinch herself and go, yeah, I'm pretty real. I mean, when he said, you're not my real mom, I'm like, yeah, I think I'm real here, and I really fed you today. And another thing I added to that is I'd say, I know your favorite color, I know your favorite food. I don't think your birth mom knows that about. I'm pretty real. I think we're good. I'm real. So that kind of helped with that. How will we deal with unknown health issues? We are right in the middle of that right now. David's 22. A month ago, he had a blood clot to his lung. He's doing fine now, otherwise he wouldn't be here. But they still haven't figured it out, and they're going to do more testing. It could be something hereditary. So that is definitely a fear. And it could be something he'll deal with all of his life. So we don't know what is in the medical history of the birth parents. What if the biological parents change their minds? That's a big question. Will the community accept transracial families if you adopt a child from a different race or culture? Will I get the help I need after the child is in our home? Well, yes, I believe you will. We did, and there are some different ways that you can get it. On Disciples Today, which you're probably familiar with, there's a special place where there are adoption articles that are written once a month. It's a little part called Forever Families. It's a little difficult to find, so that's why I put two different screens here. You've got to scroll all the way down to the bottom. It'll be on your left and under the heading Kingdom Kids. And they also have archived all these articles. There are articles from adoptive adult children. There are articles from fostering to adopt. There are articles about really vulnerably parents sharing about things they've gone through. Lots of great articles there. Also, there's a Facebook page that the ICOC has put together called Forever Families. And that is for members of the International Churches of Christ. And the reason it is so that we can be very vulnerable on that page. And there are people that will share things and say, hey, we're going through this struggle with our son. Has anybody out there ever experienced that? So it's a great opportunity to share just and get help from other families. As Leah mentioned, I'm an adoption coach. Here's a picture of my website. It's embracingchildadoption.com, and I have some cards here up front you're willing to that you can pick up if you'd like. And also I'm willing, while we're at the conference, it's a wonderful opportunity to have sessions if you'd like. I'm available during the meal times for the rest of the conference and offering those at half off because I think we are here, can do face-to-face. I also, and that's written on the back, it's a little coupon in the card. Also, we can do Skype across the miles as well. Also have a Facebook page too. You know, it really does help. The pre-adoption coaching helps to make a smooth transition. That's something to consider. And you know, if you are still working through some of those fears, I would just encourage you to be transparent with a trusted friend, another disciple that really knows you, and you can talk through those things and be really vulnerable. What is it really that's scary? And just to have that surrender heart, that's just really hard to get to surrendering, but that's the path there if you have those fears. So we've considered the reasons, we've considered the costs, we've considered the fears. Now we're going to consider your choices. So fast forward. So let's say you're surrendered your fears and you're ready to adopt. Congratulations, woohoo! You know, we've gone through the 20 questions game, but there's more questions. But these are the fun ones. I mean, these are just, but still definitely worth tackling. So what age and gender would you consider? That's a lot to think about. For us, when we first decided to adopt, we thought, well, we're going to adopt a girl from China. We've got girls. We know how girls work. We got the clothes we can hand down, everything like that, until my mom, who's really good at biting her tongue as a mother-in-law to Lee whenever she needs to, she felt like she really needed to say something because, of course, she adopted, but she's like, you know what, this is a cool situation. You don't have very often where you get to pick the gender of the child. And that's the neat thing about adoption. You get to pick that. I mean, when can you do that? And so she's like, you know what? And she really paid Lee a big compliment. She said, I think this world needs a Lee Boger Jr., you know, just a boy. And so guess what? We have a Lee Boger Jr. So, I mean, it's just, it's neat that you can just consider that and think about what would it be like to have a boy or a girl? And if you want, I think it's helpful to list the pros and cons on paper with the age and the gender. Like Lee said, the older a child is, the more baggage they're going to bring into your home. So that's something to think about. And especially if they're in a foster care system, they might have habits and actions that aren't acceptable in your home. So that's something to consider. And you know, we just kind of handed a package. We were handed a package of someone else or an organization raising our child for the first 4 years, which is a really formidable time in their life. And the older the child, the more loss they're going to have and be able to really feel. Would you prefer to adopt domestically or internationally? That's another question. Pros and cons again, just write them down. You know, with international, I don't know if it is the same way today, but we had to fill out a form that was really incredibly difficult as to which disabilities we would or would not accept.
Right.
I'm like going, oh my goodness, I feel like I'm playing God here. You know, like, would you accept a blind child? Yes or no? And you had to check yes or no. I'm like, ugh, it's just so hard to do, but that's something that we go through when we go through the international, and what country, if you decide international, what country. There's challenges with an international child. You've got the language barriers, you've got cultural barriers. And what I'd like to do just for fun is show you a 1-minute video of when Lee and I first met David. So this is the moment I've been praying for 3 years. And just to set the stage here, we're walking into the home of his foster family. He'd been in the orphanage until, in Romania, you stay in an orphanage till you're 4, and then you move to the older orphanage. Well, because he was 4 years old and 2 weeks old when we adopted him, I had to sit in the United States on his 4th birthday, thinking about him, thinking how he was having a birthday, and he didn't even know it was his birthday, you know, and we're here. But 2 weeks later, we adopted him, but instead of putting him into the older orphanage, they put him in a foster home, and that also helped him adjust to family life a little bit more. So you'll see us walking into that home, the foster mom greeting us at the door. The 2 women with us are the adoption lawyer and her assistant, and you won't see Lee because he's videotaping. So, mind if we take video? Or pictures? It's fine,
Dai un puțin, mama. Dai o guriță lui mama, dai o guriță. Și lui mami. Și lui mami. Florin. Și lui mami. Așa. Și da, și nu mi se dai și eu un pus? Hai, vină. Ia, păi iau? O luăm cu noi? Nu?
Can you tell him that we're glad to see him?
Vedi ce schiriosine così. Ce-i acolo? Ce-i acolo, mamă? Ești fericit că a venit tata? E tata?
So yeah, so he is 4, but he looks more like a 2-year-old, and he was just kind of talking baby talk even in Romanian. But that's when we first saw him. You know, if you decide to go domestic, would you prefer an open or closed adoption? You know, which would involve having contact with the birth parents or not. This is a big thing to think about. There are tissues up here. Yeah, it is heart-wrenching. You know, depending on the state, the birth mom has up to 6 months to change their mind. So that's something to think about. I personally could not deal with that. So that's why we personally chose international. I'm maybe call it selfish. I'm like, if this child's mine, this child is mine. You know, if you relinquish the child, then it's mine. He's mine now. But then some people, I've seen it work wonderfully, beautifully, with the birth mom being involved all through the child's life. So that's something to consider. Which adoption agency should you use? Shelley's here, and she works with an adoption agency, and I'm sure she'd be happy to talk with any of you about some of those questions you might have. How do you feel about having a child who may look a lot different from you, and the questions and comments it will bring? That's a decision, a discussion. Would you be interested in fostering to adopt? This way you'd avoid the agency fees. And it varies from state to state. In some cases, there may be actually no cost to you. And there's a lot of medical subsidies that would be available for you, post-adoption therapies, so there's a lot of benefits to that. Another thing is you would be able to have the child in your home and observe how you interact with the child, and if you already have children in the home, how they interact, and just kind of test the waters with a particular child if you choose to go that route. Now, of course, with the foster care system, there's going to be a lot of different challenges, including developing trust, because these kids have most likely been bounced around from foster home to foster home. There's a family in our congregation, actually there's 2. There's one who are in the Indianapolis church where we go, one who foster children. They've adopted 2 of their own, and are not really interested in adopting another, and they have a biological child, but they're foster parents. Also, there's another family who did foster to adopt, and I asked her to give me some things I could share with you, and unfortunately I left the paper in the hotel room, but I will just summarize because I wanted to share from their perspective since I haven't had that perspective. They first considered fostering with adoption in mind because they have 4 boys and they wanted to see what we like to have a girl. They had that little girl void in their hearts. And so they went through the foster parent training and got licensed, and then they first provided respite care for other foster families. So they'd have this little girl in their home on weekends, over the years, from time to time on weekends. And I believe she's about 4 or 5 years old. I remember when she first started coming to church with them. And now she's in the teens, and they did adopt her, and that's kind of their story. And if you want to contact me through my number, they gave me their number to give to any of you who might be interested in talking with them about their experience, and I'd be happy to do that. Another question, would you consider adopting a special needs child? That is very honorable if you do. It just takes a lot of preparation mentally, financially. There's going to be medical bills. There's going to be emotional things. You'll need a lot of extra patience in that case and preparation. Now I'd like to show you, just for fun, another video of our family, just another 1-minute video. Now we're going to fast forward 18 months from this time. So David's been in our home for 18 months. He's learning English, but as you can tell, it's kind of choppy, a little bit choppy. You can tell he's a hyperactive little boy with plenty of energy, and you'll see his sister Mariah in the picture too. So this is just, I don't know, this is just fun, just to see how things, show you how things develop after they've been in the home for a while. Hey David, do you like the leaves?
Huh?
Do you like the leaves?
Yeah. So what do you want?
What? Stay back there so I can see you a little bit.
A young lady, man, a pizza man. What do you do? Hold my hand. Hold my hand.
Hey David, do you like Mrs. Buchanan at school?
Yes, and Miss Boger. I say, hey young lady, we had cupcake.
Today?
Yep.
There was somebody's birthday today at school?
Ethan.
Halloween.
Oh, well, he didn't have a Halloween party, but you did. Okay, go.
Have a cupcake.
Cool, man.
Thank
Okay,
you.
David, run and go jump in the leaves.
Mommy, don't show it. Don't show it.
So that's my daughter's favorite video of their childhood. I mean, the real video isn't that choppy, but it's just fun, and it just, I don't know, I love it. So to kind of summarize here, and we'll have time for question and answers, you know, if you decide to adopt, not to adopt, that's okay, and I want you to feel that. You know, as far as making this decision, if you do decide to adopt, my experience has been that God shines the way to lead you on your path, to show you if that's for you or not. Just, you know, just as it says in Psalm 68:6, that he sets the lonely in families, that's what he wants to do. You know, when I think of Pharaoh's daughter that Lee read about adopting Moses, it's just mind-boggling to think about how history would be if she hadn't. I mean, think about all that Moses did, and history was changed. And really, that's what I want to encourage you with, that your impact on in the future of a child can really change history. And think of all the people that child can impact as well. So thank you so much for your attention.
Okay, any other Q&As that are on your heart that you want to share?
My question is a little similar. So we have 3 children, biological children already. The spread is 12, 10, and 3. And so just what challenges or what successes did you see with your biological children bonding with, and, you know, the adopted child? What challenges and what goods and bads were there?
Let me share first. Yeah, the question was, if you have biological children already, different ages, what would be the impact, good or bad, that we've seen with their interaction as siblings? We'll share first.
Well, first of all, we had the decision of trying to figure out if we're going to adopt in birth order or not. And so we went out of order. But I read the birth order thing, and I'm like, yeah, because that's the age of the child we wanted. It really was very helpful to have biological children. You know, I've seen other families who don't have any children already in the home, and it's just a little bit more of a struggle. It was helpful because our son just kind of fit in as far as watching the girls. He watched what happened when they didn't obey, and he didn't know the language. So when we'd say, get in the car and say, put on your seatbelt, well, he didn't know what we said, but they did, and so he just put on the seatbelt or wash your hands for dinner, and they went off, and he went off, and so that really did help. It really did a lot for our daughters in their development as Christians. They both responded differently. Mariah is really tender-hearted, and so as there have been struggles, especially through David's teenage years, it has affected her deeply, and she's felt those deeply, and it's been a bit of a struggle for her. Natalie, on the other hand, had a hard time having compassion. So she has grown in that area. So it's really been neat seeing how our kids have, I mean, it's just been wonderful. And later on, there's a class maybe you're planning on attending with a family with adult children and a sibling who's going to share. So you'll get to see that from their perspective as well. Hopefully that helps.
I think the only thing I could add was, since we had two girls bringing in a boy, our youngest was kind of looking to him kind of like a big brother to protect me, and but with the emotional challenges that he had, he really couldn't go there yet. And so that was, you know, a little disappointing for her because she didn't know what to expect. But I think the biggest difference looking back is my expectations, knowing the emotional challenges that this child has, would prepare me to help the siblings embrace him and understand what the challenges were going to be, especially if you have older ones. That would be helpful, I think.
That's the most too. Also, you might be interested in listening to the recording of the class we did last night about discipline is different if you weren't there, because that is something to consider, that it is different with an adopted child. It's not the same as birth children in some ways. So.
Any other questions? Thoughts?
Did you say it took 3 years?
For-
The whole process?
No, the process didn't take 3 years. It took 3 years for God to change Lee's heart. or Lee, it took Lee 3 years. God was probably ready, but Lee. But it's different with every child and every situation, and just the timing of things. When we adopted, it literally took 6 months, which was shocking. Usually international adoptions were about 2 years. But we worked with Hope for Children, which was then part of Hope Worldwide, and they were just opening the doors for Romania. And so there were kids waiting, and so it was kind of expedited. So
3 long years, by the way. She was
okay.
patient.
He came around.
That's right. She was patient with me. Other questions? All right. If I could share just one thing, looking back through this whole process, it kind of ties into some of your questions about, can I really love this child? The thing that God did in when you enter into this world, you're entering into an emotional area that few people go, they just don't go there. You're going to experience, if you go down this path, you're going to go into an area that God lives in every day. Mm-hmm. When He adopted us, right, He was all in. He put His Spirit inside of us, and even when we struggle spiritually and do poorly, He's right there walking with us, going through it. And that's kind of what it is. God has increased my capacity to handle more through this. And to me, that's a great thing. But what comes with it, the positives and the suffering that comes with it, that's just part of it. But the end result is better. So appreciate your time and coming today. I hope it was helpful.
And don't forget the handout.
Oh, and the handout up here, make sure you get that if you want a copy of all the questions that she went through, and her coaching card here. It's all up here up front. Thank you.
Thanks.